In tonight's story, betrayal runs deep, but revenge runs deeper. You're listening to Revenge with Jack, where justice always finds its way. They say endings arrive with fanfare. Mine came with a clock and a perfect blazer. I sat at my desk at North Star Haven, the only desk I'd needed for 15 years, and watched Vanessa fold her arms like a closing door. "Fresh perspectives," she said, and the words sounded like new paint over old rot. 11 days into her presidency, and here we were. The operational backbone goes first. The face stays. I kept my own face neutral. That old habit of mine. Don't give the room oxygen it doesn't deserve. I slid open the top drawer and began to empty what little I'd let accumulate. 2 pens that wrote smoother than the rest, a thumb drive with training modules I'd built on weekends, a small jar of paper clips that only I ever refilled. Ordinary things, but they tell you who you are when no one's looking. Across from me, my sister checked the time. 6 months severance. HR has everything ready. Our board, her, our father, and 2 of her friends from business school had agreed. It wasn't personal, she would say later. It never is, until it is. I wrapped the family photos in printer paper so the glass wouldn't crack in the box. My grandfather stared back in black and white from the sidewalk in Burlington, the first hotel behind him, the winter sky low and stubborn. He'd held the key ring like a promise. I placed him last, on top, where the weight is lightest. "Nothing to say?" Vanessa asked. Manicure flawless. Smile unbothered. She had always been the face. Panels, investor luncheons, magazine profiles. The glamorous verbs. I had been the verbs no one applauds. Negotiate, reconcile, repair. Stairwells, boiler rooms, linen docks at dawn. The unglamorous work that keeps a bed warm and a lobby calm. I looked up and let myself smile, just a tilt. "Good luck with the Westbrook renovation," I said. A small sentence, set down like a tool she didn't know how to use. For a split second her eyes flashed. Fear, or calculation, maybe both. Harborline Westbrook was behind schedule and off budget, and she knew I knew every bolt of it. "We'll manage," she recovered. "The consultant has turned around properties twice that size." I nodded as if I believed in her borrowed certainty. Then I lifted the box. 15 years undone in 15 minutes. The ratio felt obscene and, somehow, perfectly American. In the hallway, the carpet muffled my steps. I walked past the framed press clippings she loved and pressed the lobby button with my elbow. No farewell tour, no speeches. The doors slid open. As they closed, I saw my reflection. 42 and unremarkable to anyone except the people who needed hot water by dawn and clean sheets by 3. That was enough. Outside, Boston air met me with its familiar salt. I set the box in the passenger seat. I remembered my father's voice from 5 years back, a quiet aside that had shifted the ground beneath my feet. Land, not applause. I wasn't worried. I was patient. Foundations don't panic. They wait. I started the car and pulled away, the building shrinking in the mirror until it was only glass and angles. The work would go on without me, but not the ground that held it. I didn't learn hospitality in boardrooms. I learned it kneeling next to a hissing radiator at 2 a.m., listening to the way old pipes argue with winter. By 16, I could coax heat from a stubborn boiler, splice a frayed cord in the laundry, calm a night auditor who'd seen one complaint too many. While Vanessa shadowed our father under hotel chandeliers, I shadowed Luis in service corridors that smelled like bleach and coffee. He taught me to treat a stuck elevator like a frightened animal, steady voice, patient hands. Somewhere in those back hallways, I fell in love with cause and effect. Touch this. That changes. Solve what you can reach. Our father, Richard, never mocked my preference for the unlit routes. "Your sister sells the horizon," he said once. "You keep it from slipping." He said it without heat, like a weather report. Then, 5 years ago, over steak and the soft clink of ice in his water, he offered a sentence that sounded simple but landed like a map. "Don't stack your whole life on applause. In this business, son, rooms change hands. Land doesn't." I started reading deeds the way Vanessa read press releases. The spreadsheets were unforgiving. Burlington, Portland, Westbrook, our 3 most reliable producers, all thriving on parcels North Star didn't own. 99-year leases signed when color televisions were a novelty. The original landlords had passed. Their children and grandchildren were reorganizing assets. The way heirs do when nostalgia turns expensive. I saw the same story repeating across towns. Heirs prefer liquidity. Families relocate. Taxes rise faster than sentiment. A vulnerability, I told Richard, pushing my plate aside. If a new landlord decided to update market rate, our margins would bleed out by inches. He listened with that tilt of his head that used to make me straighten my posture as a kid. The company's capital is tied up in Providence, he said. If I could, let me, I said. My savings were sturdy, born from quiet promotions and a habit of living beneath my means. The bank manager knew me by my first and last name, not by a golf handicap. That helped more than people think. Within 3 months, papers were inked. EC Holdings, my initials and a promise, took title to the ground beneath our 3 pillars. We drafted 5-year preferential leases at rates that favored Northstar without insulting the market. I wanted the company to breathe. I wanted it to remember who kept the air flowing. It was all in the corporate records, and yes, I knew how often executives read the fine print they nod over. Vanessa skimmed for headlines, not footnotes. Footnotes are where leverage lives. When the ink dried, I drove to Burlington alone. The old hotel sat like a ship at anchor. I walked the perimeter in winter gloves, palm on brick, and felt the quiet satisfaction of a foundation telling you it's yours now. I wasn't hunting a crown. I was building scaffolding. The difference matters, even if magazines can't photograph it. The leases ticked forward, 5 years like a slow inhale. Renewal would arrive the way seasons do. No trumpet, just certainty. I went back to work. Unseen doesn't mean unprepared. The first morning after, my phone forgot my name. No overnight reports pinging through the dark. No front desk notes about a tour bus arriving early or a water main sulking in Portland. Just the small silence of a house that didn't need me. I woke at 5:30 anyway. Habits keep their own clocks. I ground beans, listened to the grinder's modest thunder, and took my mug to the balcony where Boston Harbor lay like a held breath. Container ships moved on their rails of tide, square-shouldered, indifferent, good at minding their purpose. I'd always admired that about them. They carried value without commentary. A text broke the quiet. Luis. Heard what happened? Their loss, Hermano. New consultants cutting corners at Westbrook. Cheap fixtures, deferred maintenance. Guess we'll feel it. I stared at the message a long minute, thumb warm against glass. I typed back, thanks for telling me. Then nothing else. Not my job anymore, I told myself. But people aren't jobs. They're faces you've memorized on double shifts and names you say first when the fire alarm hiccups at 3 a.m. Another buzz. From Richard. Breakfast at Rosie's. 8. A location pinned to our beginnings. Rosie's still smelled like butter and coffee the way churches smell like old hymns. He was already in the corner booth, hair gone thinner, posture gone softer. She told me after, he said, skipping greetings. I would have handled it differently. He didn't meet my eyes when he said it, and I understood. He had not handled it at all. I stirred cream into black coffee until it turned a good storm cloud color. Northstar wants to become less family, more corporate, he tried. Vanessa thinks scale forgives edges. Edges cut, I said. We let the plates arrive. His blueberry pancakes, my eggs and toast. Ritual matters. It steadies the hand. He cleared his throat. The leases. She doesn't grasp the full arrangement. I cut into my eggs, neat lines, neat answers. It's all in the documents. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man trying to erase a line drawn too heavy. Renewal comes due soon. 3 months, I said. Nora's drafting terms. He looked up. What are you planning, Ethan? Patience isn't passive, it's a tool. I set down my fork. Market rate, I said. No favors, no punishments. Just the price the ground commands. He exhaled, something between relief and worry. That will raise operating costs. Significantly. Yes, I said. It will. The truth sat on the table between the syrup and the salt. A small, unadorned fact. We paid and stepped into the thin winter sun. On the sidewalk, he touched my shoulder the way fathers do when words risk bruising. Your sister plays for trophies, he said. You build for weather. He didn't add which wins longer. He didn't have to. On the drive home, the harbor kept its slow pulse. I thought about ships and schedules, about how the tide doesn't argue with the moon. Renewals would come. Foundations would speak in invoices and clauses. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was aligning the ground. Vanessa called 2 weeks too late, her voice smoothed to boardroom temperature. We need to discuss transition, she said, like we were passing a baton and not a knife. I let it go to voicemail. She followed with a text, missing files, vendor contracts, maintenance schedules, Westbrook plans. Please respond. I stared at the screen until my coffee went cold. Everything lived on the shared drive, nested the way I'd always nested it, by property, by department, by date. Folders like tidy hallways, labels like lights. The doorbell rang the next afternoon. She didn't wait for an invitation, just brushed past me into the living room, a weather system in a fitted suit. You're ignoring me, she said. I'm respecting your decision, I answered. She sat, crossed her legs. The heel started tapping its small metronome. Your organization isn't intuitive. My consultant needs context. I poured myself coffee, didn't offer her one. Your consultant turns around properties twice our size, I said gently. He can navigate a filing system. Her eyes narrowed. She recognized her own boast returned without glitter. This isn't helpful. The company needs. I don't work for the company, I said. Remember? Silence pulled between us. She rose, smoothed her skirt back into place. Legal will be in touch. Do what you need to do, I said, opening the door. She walked out with the careful dignity of someone rehearsing victory. The hallway swallowed her perfume. The certified letter arrived with the next morning's mail. A courteous demand for all documents pertaining to company operations. I forwarded it to Nora. She replied within the hour with a list as precise as a ledger, server directories, version histories, timestamps. A closing paragraph reminded their counsel that personal notes, training drafts, and private correspondence belonged to me. No heat, just statute and spine. The phone began to fill with calls I hadn't asked for. A housekeeper from Burlington whose schedule had been cut to part-time. A front desk lead in Portland who now worked alone through the dinner rush because efficiency. Louise sent photos, cheaper faucets at Westbrook, chrome that bruised under a fingernail, caulk lines already yellowing like old teeth. Guest comments turned brittle. Delays multiplied the way problems do when pride is paying the invoices. I wanted to feel something sharp. Triumph, maybe. Proof that my quiet mattered. Instead, I felt a hollow ache I knew from winter. Rooms that won't warm up because someone swapped the gasket for a cheaper one. You can't see the savings on a brochure, but you can feel the draft at 2 in the morning. I told myself this wasn't my fight anymore. Then I remembered names. Faces bent over laundry steam. Laughs in break rooms that smelled like oranges and bleach. I thought of the way Louise signed his texts, Quiet 8, and how care is a choice you make when no one gives you a KPI for it. That night, I opened my laptop and mapped the damage like weather. Notes, dates, photos, voices. Not to intervene, to understand. Storms pass, I told myself, but only when someone minds the roof. The email came dressed like any other. Subject line bland as oatmeal, cinder block polite. Policy update clarification requested. Our insurer wanted to verify recent ownership confirmations for underlying parcels associated with Burlington, Portland, and Westbrook. Underlying parcels. The phrase slid a small, precise knife between old assumptions. I read it twice, once as a man, once as a ledger. Then I forwarded it to Nora with 3 words. See attached, please. By noon she called. They've finally connected EC Holdings to you, she said, voice low, pleased only by the neatness of sequence. Want me to respond? Yes, I said. Confirm titles and current lease terms. Copy Northstar's counsel. Sun needled through the blinds, striping my desk like ruled paper. I thought of signatures layered over time, the way ink becomes lineage. An hour later, my phone lit with my father's name. He didn't say hello. You own the land, he said, like a man opening a door he'd walked past a dozen times. You knew that, I answered gently. It's in the filings. He blew out a breath that sounded older than him. She thought EC Holdings was a management company. She doesn't read footnotes, I said. Silence hummed. Not accusation, just the cost of skipped pages. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow, he finally said. 2 p.m. His voice carried both apology and habit. They're calling it noncompliance. Hidden information. I looked at the email thread Nora had just sent. Timestamps, deed references, lease clauses highlighted like little lighthouses. Nothing was hidden, I said. Nothing has been anything but ordinary and documented. I know, he said. The words sounded tired. Be there anyway. After we hung up, I sat with the quiet. My grandfather's photo leaned against a stack of vendor bids on the shelf, Burlington winter frozen behind him. I pulled the picture down, held the weight of its glass. In the reflection, a man you wouldn't notice at a conference. That had always been the point. I drafted the renewal terms with Nora that afternoon. No tricks. Market rates as they currently stood, escalators modest and predictable, maintenance thresholds explicit so no one could call neglect profit. We added a paragraph I insisted on. Right of first refusal for any sale of the buildings, so surprise wouldn't be a business model. Nora liked the fairness of it. You're offering the kind of certainty money tries to fake, she said. When we finished, I walked to the harbor and let the wind file me down. Gulls stitched the sky. A tugboat shouldered a barge upriver. Small power, moving larger consequence. I thought of Vanessa rehearsing her outrage for tomorrow. Of Derek Shaw, who watched more carefully than he spoke. Of Richard, hands around a paper cup, worrying the lid like a confession. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I felt like a surveyor does, measuring what is, not what should be. The ground was the ground. Prices were simply how it spoke. I parked across from Harborline Westbrook and let the building study me like an old friend who knows you've changed your haircut but won't say it. Glass caught the morning and threw it back to sea. Guests flowed in and out carrying their small lives in rolling suitcases, the way people do when a place is both stopover and story. I told myself I was only here to watch the tide of operations in my absence, to see whether the lobby plants had been watered, whether the new fixtures had already learned to fail. Maybe that was partly true. Maybe I wanted to measure what leaving does. Vanessa's silver sedan slid into the reserved spot, precise as a signature. She strode inside with the consultant, both of them talking with their hands, pointing at corners that didn't need pointing at. Louise texted a minute later. Emergency inspection. They're asking for blueprints, surveys, anything with seals. I asked him for the usual, breathe, document, don't argue with a storm while it's still deciding its path. Then I turned the key and drove to the county records office because paper has its own kind of weather and I know how to read barometers. Public records smell like dust and the slow patience of staples. I searched parcels and deeds I already knew by heart, then asked for adjacent filings out of habit. Sure enough, a permit application from 2 years ago, neatly stamped, filed under a name I hadn't used for my sister in years, her married one. The project description was tidy, ambitious, and specific. Oceanfront, mixed use anchored by a luxury hotel. Not North Star Haven. Cole Vision, LLC. I sat very still, like a man who hears a pipe groan in the wall and understands the water's language. The clerk offered me a chair with a crack in the vinyl. I took it and kept reading. There were echoes of the same corporate signature in Burlington and in a corridor outside Portland. Permits, feasibility studies, traffic impact assessments, all orbiting markets where our properties had been healthiest. I traced the filings like constellations and saw the shape they formed. Not rumor. Plan. Not synergy. Competition, wearing our lessons like borrowed clothes. Outside, winter bounced off the bay and found my face. I called Nora. Look up Cole Vision LLC, I said, and everything it touches. 2 days later, the picture sharpened. Investor decks courting capital with slides about leveraging existing expertise and loyal clientele acquired at North Star. Consultants paid to say growth words. A timeline overlapping my last 3 years of middle-of-the-night boiler room calls. She'd been building while I'd been fixing. She'd fired me not because I was inessential, but because I was in the way. For a long time, I watched the ocean count its breath. Anger showed up late, cautious, trying on the room. Betrayal arrived softer, sat beside it, didn't speak. I thought of our grandfather's key ring, of my father's advice about land, of how Vanessa learned to love applause and forgot to love structure. Then, because action is the only way I know to quiet weather, I sent Nora a message, prepare summaries. Dates, permits, investors, the line where intent steps over fidelity. The harbor went on being itself. Honest, salt-stung, useful. I took that as permission. The call came while I was chopping onions for a soup I didn't really need. I let it ring once, twice, then answered because the screen showed a number I recognized from board packets and nothing else. Derek Shaw. He skipped pleasantries. I haven't said this, he began, and you haven't heard it. Papers rustled on his end, the sound of someone rearranging loyalties. Vanessa's taking a proposal to the board this afternoon. She'll argue Burlington, Portland, and Westbrook are untenable under your renewal terms. She wants to sell the buildings fast. I set the knife down. The onion kept its tears to itself. To whom? I asked, though part of me already knew. He didn't answer the question directly. There's talk of strategic buyers and timely exits. The slide deck leans on urgency. He paused. She insists you're orchestrating a squeeze. I wiped the cutting board with the flat of my palm, crumbs of onion sticking to skin. Thanks for calling, Derek. I didn't, he said, and the line went quiet. I stood in my kitchen and pictured the move. Declare the crown jewels unprofitable, force a fire sale, then have Cole Vision circle with a clean-faced bidder to acquire the buildings at a discount. Keep my land, inherit my buildings. Turn me into a landlord for her second act. It was tidy, if you ignored the people inside the math. I pulled out the folder Nora had assembled and added a page. A simple schematic drawn in my steady handwriting. 3 boxes for 3 hotels. Arrows to the parcels beneath them. A second layer of arrows to the permits we'd found. A third arrow to the boardroom, where urgency would be the star witness. I stared at the diagram and felt the old calm I used in boiler rooms settle in. When pipes groan, you don't argue with them. You find the valve. You turn it until the pressure stops lying. I called Nora. We move now, I said. If they sell, who buys matters. Commonwealth, she asked, already reaching for the files I hadn't mentioned yet. I'd met Oliver Grant enough times to know 2 things. He prized staff continuity, and he didn't need Vanessa's approval to sleep at night. Set up a meeting, I said. I'll fly tomorrow. Before bed, I texted Luis. If anyone asks about rumors, tell them to measure twice and not to panic. He replied with a thumbs up and a photo of a freshly tightened valve. The metal looked honest again. I sat a while with the feeling of betrayal, but it didn't bite the way I expected. Maybe because the plan was so painfully predictable. Maybe because the cure had been sitting in my desk for 5 years, waiting to be needed. I packed a small bag with the usual basics and the unusual ones. Copies of leases, staffing rosters, building histories, the kind of material executives skim and operators live by. In the mirror, a man who preferred foundations over headlines checked that his shoes were quiet enough for long hallways. Then I turned off the kitchen light and let the apartment settle. There would be a board meeting. There would be speeches. There would be weather. I would bring a better roof. Oliver Grant's office sits above Central Park like a ship's bridge, quiet, high, all windows and weather. I arrived with a slim portfolio and the kind of calm you wear when panic would only waste the air. He shook my hand like a man who's learned names by remembering work, not headlines. Ethan, he said, we've tried to poach you twice. I smiled. I remember. I wasn't ready to leave foundations then. He gestured to the chairs by the glass. The part below looked like a neat idea someone had trimmed into obedience. I opened the portfolio and laid the pages out in an order that felt like a floor plan. Leases first, then building histories, staffing rosters, cost curves, guest satisfaction trends, the photographs that prove what charts only imply. 3 assets, I said. Burlington, Portland, Westbrook. The ground is mine. The buildings are likely to be on the market soon, not by choice but by the story they'll tell to justify it. Oliver flipped through the leases, pausing at clauses like a mechanic listening to an unfamiliar engine. Market rates on renewal, he said. Fair. Uncomfortable for them. Honest, I said. He asked the right questions. Not just revenue per room, but how the night audit reconciles when the system drops a reservation at 1:13 a.m. Not just spa margins, but what happens to linen when the supplier changes detergent without warning. I answered because I've had my hands in those hours. Because you don't forget where the valves are once you've turned them in the dark. And why come to me? He finally asked. Because you keep people, I said. When you buy, you don't salt the earth. You fertilize it. I want these staff intact. I want the properties protected from egos that confuse velocity with direction. He looked out at the trees, bare and honest. What are you asking? Acquire the buildings when they're offered. I'll keep the land and lease to you at rates that make sense. You'll get stability and market presence. I'll get partners who don't treat maintenance like a rounding error. He sat with it, the way a good musician sits with a note's last breath. Then he nodded, small and complete. Our legal team will draft terms today. He tapped the leases. And Ethan, If we do this, the staff stay. That's not a pitch line. It's a rule. I let out a breath. I hadn't realized I was rationing. That was the point before we had points. Back at the hotel that night, I texted quietly. Luis first, then the front desk leads, the housekeeping supervisors, the sous chefs who keep Friday from collapsing. Nothing dramatic. A sentence here, a reassurance there. Change may be coming. Your work matters. You'll be okay. Digital kindnesses that buy courage for one more shift. Nora called near midnight. Commonwealth is in, she said. Paper is moving. I stood by the window of a room that wasn't mine and watched the city pace its sleepless logic. Deals make noise. Foundations don't. I closed the curtains and set my alarm for early. Morning loves a prepared table. The conference room at North Star Haven had always felt a size too big for honesty. Glass table, long enough to divide a family twice. I arrived 5 minutes early and chose the far end, the seat with the bad sight line to the skyline, but a clear view of the hinges on the door. Vanessa already sat at the head, posture perfect, a ring of bottled water soldiers in front of her. Richard was to her right, his tie slightly off center, which for him counted as a confession. Derek Shaw nodded at me without smiling. 2 other directors stacked their tablets like shields. Vanessa opened before the clock allowed. Let's be clear, she said, like clarity could be willed into existence. Ethan is attempting a hostile maneuver. He's raised ground rents to levels that make 3 properties unviable, forcing us toward a fire sale he has orchestrated. She slid a packet down the table, graphs pitched to frighten. I let it land in front of me and didn't touch it. When a hallway pipe bangs, you don't bang back. You listen for where the pressure is lying. My turn, I said when she paused to sip victory. I laid out my own folders, one for each director, then one for her. The covers were plain. Inside, not so much. Deeds, lease renewals, renewal comparables from 2 independent firms, and then the new weight, Nora's summaries. Permit filings for Cole Vision LLC in Portland, Westbrook, Burlington. Investor decks with language about leveraging existing North Star clientele. Emails obtained through public records requests tying timelines to board presentations. This is an attempt to sell Burlington, Portland, and Westbrook below their intrinsic value, I said, voice even. Not because they're unviable. Under competent operation they're exceptional, but because someone intends to repurchase or align with a buying entity through a separate venture. I didn't look at Vanessa when I said someone. I didn't need to. Richard opened his folder and went gray around the edges. He held one page a long time, the way you hold a photograph you don't want to recognize. Vanessa? He asked, and the room lost a degree of temperature. She lifted her chin. Cole Vision is exploratory, she said. Consulting. Those filings are options, not commitments. Derek cleared his throat, dry paper in a dry room. Yet the Westbrook permit lists a start date tied to a North Star refinancing calendar. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a storm decides to break. I took a breath I'd measured in advance. Commonwealth Hospitality has made an offer to acquire the buildings at above-market valuation, I said, placing a separate stack on the glass. Offer includes, assuming all current employee positions at existing pay or better, honoring guest commitments, maintaining community partnerships, and a capital plan for deferred maintenance. Ground leases at market rate with escalators already disclosed. A guarantee, visible and readable. The kind of sentence people can stand on. Vanessa laughed once, a sharp sound that left a thin scratch in the air. You're selling us to outsiders. No, I said. You tried to sell our people to your ambition. I'm giving them a landing that doesn't punish their loyalty. I met Richard's eyes, and I'm keeping the foundation steady. The vote took 9 minutes and many years. Derek moved to accept Commonwealth's offer. One director seconded like he'd been waiting for a chance to pick up something heavy and finally set it down. Vanessa argued timing, leverage, fiduciary duty. The words fell apart as they reached the table. Richard stared at a point just past his hands. When the roll call ended, the decision stood, approved, unanimous, except for Richard's abstention, which broke something delicate and necessary in my chest. Vanessa rose so fast her chair stuttered. She gathered nothing and left everything. The door closed behind her with the soft, expensive hush of a well-oiled hinge. After, Derek approached me, quiet as a linen cart. We'll be requesting her resignation tomorrow, he said. We'll need interim leadership. I shook my head. Not me. He studied my face and seemed to understand. Foundations, he said, not quite a question. Foundations, I answered. Outside, the city carried on, tireless and unpersuaded. I stood on the sidewalk with my grandfather's photo in my bag and the smell of winter sharpening to evening. We had kept the ground honest. We had offered a roof that wouldn't leak. The rest would be weather. A year is enough time for a building to remember its purpose. I stood on the rooftop terrace where I'd once watched contractors argue with the wind and now watched guests lift their faces to it. Harborline Westbrook had a new name, Harbor View, and an old soul. Commonwealth didn't gild it, they listened to it. The rails gleamed because someone cared, not because someone posed. Below, Casco Bay kept doing what water does, work without applause. Oliver handed me a thin report like a secret we both already knew. Revenue up 17%. Not a miracle, just the math of steady floors, respected staff, unhurried maintenance. Luis still carried his ring of keys like a rosary. The front desk kept a bowl of peppermints for children who didn't like waiting. Housekeeping had new carts with wheels that didn't wobble, and the laundry room sang in a lower, kinder register. These aren't bullet points for a press release, but they are the reasons guests come back. My title at Commonwealth is Consulting Director for the Northeast, though most days I feel like a translator, turning balance sheets into working showers, turning brand promise into pillowcases that don't scratch a traveler's cheek. I'm good at that language. It doesn't need a stage. It needs time, attention, parts that fit. When Oliver thanks me, he keeps it modest, the way one craftsman nods to another across a finished edge. Richard and I meet once a month at a small place that still burns toast if you don't warn them. We sit too long, talk about weather and food and baseball, and then, almost always, he drifts toward memory. He doesn't ask me to revisit what happened in that glass room, and I don't ask him to rewrite it. He has the grandkids on Fridays. They know me as the uncle who shows them how elevators rest between floors when they're tired. There's forgiveness hidden in those small tutorials, or at least a gentler gravity. Vanessa's venture filed for bankruptcy in the spring. I read the notice once, then put it away. Failure can teach if you listen, but I'm not her teacher anymore. When I think of her now, I try to send a quiet wish into the air. May she someday love structure as much as she loves speed. It's a generous thought, and most days I can mean it. Toward evening, the harbor turned copper. Boats traced their patient diagonals. I touched the railing and felt the cool truth of steel anchored into concrete. Concrete anchored into bedrock. People talk about vision as if it lives only above the ground. I've learned it lives beneath, where leases breathe, where maintenance hums, where promises are paid in small, daily installments. Titles change hands, slogans fade. The earth keeps its own books. My phone buzzed, a text from Richard. Dinner tonight, bringing the kids. I smiled, replied, and took the stairs down instead of the elevator. The hallway smelled like lemons and settled air. On the second floor, a couple laughed at something only they would ever find funny. I kept walking. Family isn't a board. It's a table you keep repairing. Hotels aren't temples. They're shelters you keep honest. Success isn't the view. It's the ground that will still hold you when the weather turns. I left the terrace door ajar for a breath more of the sea and went to meet the people worth keeping.